anyone that has a leadership role, because it doesn't matter on title,
Yeah.
needs to regularly look in the mirror and say, do you want to lift someone up today or do you want to tear someone down? Because, the reality of it is that we live in a world where it's so intertwined. The stats are so clear, right? UKG did a study a few years ago, which I'm sure you saw, right, where they looked at the mental health impact that people face in the workplace and what they face at home. And it's the same exact percentage. So if you're a leader, if you're a people leader particularly, you have to look at it from the vantage point that you could be the only person in that person's life that could truly make them feel good about themselves in that entire day.
Welcome to Leadership Disrupted. One of the great misconceptions about leadership is that leaders need to have all of the answers, that they should do all of the deep thinking, be the only fountain of insight and wisdom in the room or the team or the organization. But leaders who have the biggest impact are often the ones who create space for others to shine. They listen deeply and they encourage ideas, contributions of others. They also build cultures where people feel seen, trusted, and inspired to contribute. And that is a very particular skill set. And today's guest, Geoffrey Roche, is one of those leaders. And he's on a mission to transform the leadership mindset, to build what he calls heart leaders, to build leaders who do understand that they are leading humans, and leading humans is so much more challenging than simply leading processes or systems. Leading humans has great potential, but it's also hard work if you're doing it right. So, Geoffrey, first of all, welcome to Leadership Disrupted. And I think it'd be good to start with maybe you giving us a little more color commentary, background on yourself, kind of fill in the spaces so that we know who you are before we dive deep into human-centered leadership.
Yeah. Well, and obviously, thank you, Dan, certainly for the opportunity, and it's wonderful to be here with you, and obviously all the listeners, particularly of this podcast. Obviously, my really leadership experience in many ways, started when I started my early, in my early career in my hospital, which was then actually called Pocono Health System. I always share with people I was, fortunate to start my career with a phenomenal leader. And, at the time, our interim, who then became our permanent president and CEO, happened to also be a nurse like my mother. And so when I was younger, I always saw my mother lead, obviously, as the leader of our household, and certainly, active contributor into our healthcare system, delivered many babies. And obviously, many of those babies that she's delivered happen to be siblings of people I was going to school with. And also, ironically, I got to also see my mother lead at times when I would go to like No Child, Take Your Child to Work Day and those types of activities. But ultimately, when I started my career, I saw, this beautiful sense of leadership from our president and CEO. In many ways, reminded me actually of my mother. And her name was Kathy. And the way that Kathy led as a president and CEO, obviously, this is somebody who literally went from the bedside of nursing and became a president and CEO, which was her dream, but obviously earned many other roles in the healthcare system before she obtained that one. But ultimately, what I saw in her was that humble beginning of a nurse never left her. When I saw the way she led, the way she challenged her leadership team, I was a direct report of hers for many years. And I was always fascinated that she would always ask us to end every single meeting with, are we sure that we're making the best decision in the best interest of our patients and our community? And then she would always come back with, and our staff. And so, just the nature of who she was, the way she went about leading in crisis moments and in normal moments, which obviously didn't happen that often in healthcare, but she was just the type of person where when we were, stressed as a healthcare system, she would literally go in her office and come back out, changed with her scrubs on. And she would literally go to work with the nursing team or with other members of the team. And, she would tell all of us as her direct reports there's no job in this system that's ever below you or beneath you. You better be ready at all times to support everybody. And I can remember vividly different scenarios where we'd get, called into the executive offices, and she'd say, hey, we're short here, go work the desk there. And there's just so much that I learned, particularly from her, that still, stays with me today, as now, a senior leader myself, that I'm super thankful, first of all, but also the impact and the kind of footprints and imprints that I saw her leadership leave, not just on people like me, but so many others, is just, incredibly worthy.
So having a career that starts off with an amazing leader like that, of course, it's a gift. Of course, it's a wonderful thing. To some degree, though, it also somewhat sets you up, because you're consciously or not, you're thinking, okay, yeah, this is what leadership is. Okay, yep. So now I'm going to go into the rest of the corporate world, and it's going to be sweetness and light and like just a warm, fluffy blanket. What was your experience after you left that world?
Yeah. Well, interestingly enough, to your point, I mean, she left the world actually before I did. And so, okay. I can remember, she retired about 2 years prior to me leaving the organization. And her successor was very different than her. In fact, her successor, she didn't hire. The board hired her successor while she was still there, which obviously tells you as to why she retired. But her successor was incredibly different as a leader. And, so much so that, very finance-driven leader, certainly not as human-oriented as a leader. Still a leader that I, ended up working with for 2 years. But I'll tell you, actually, when he first became the interim president and CEO, I actually offered my resignation. And the reason is that I was incredibly close to the former president and CEO. He knew that. There were actually times where we had vivid disagreements because she would ask me to do things when she was the president and CEO he would disagree with as the COO. And at times he would, instead of kind of taking it up with his boss, he would take it out on me. And, when he became the interim, I looked at him and said, clearly you're probably going to want to bring your person here because so much of my role was I oversaw all external affairs at the hospital. I was responsible for all of our community relationships. I was responsible for all of our government relationships. And so I, had a director level, multiple department role, but I was also in many ways a special advisor to the president and CEO. And so
your differences in style, values, approach would have been apparent by then because of the nature of the work.
100%. And, but ironically, Dan, he rejected it. He looked at me and he said, look, I know that you certainly were, someone that worked very closely with our former president and CEO, but your skill sets are certainly are the type that I need. And so there's also a lot that I learned about that. I mean, he could have just said goodbye, you walk. We ended up having a great relationship for 2 years. Very, very different type of leader. I adjusted for sure in some capacity to sort of meet him, but I didn't adjust who I was. I certainly still was continuing to be Geoffrey. I was continuing to be respectful, obviously, but also different. But I'll tell you, as I moved on and went into other organizations, to your point, there were definitely moments where I also did kind of feel like set up at times, because I can remember when the role I earned right after is I went through a national search at the time and, ended up being named the vice president of a smaller private liberal arts college and, went through the process, ultimately got named. And then, kind of, I'll say probably because I had such a strong leader for so long, I wasn't as aware of things to always look out for. And so ended up getting this job and, a couple months in thought, oh my gosh, this is a quite very interesting leader. And what I realized is, I was, in the president's office, I was sitting in the president's office. I was the only vice president on the cabinet that sat in the president's office. But what I realized was so many other people on the campus also kind of had that same opinion, that same feeling.
Yeah.
But yet it was really tough because obviously, to your point, I was kind of almost like masked because I had such a great leader early on. And it went on for many, many years. In fact, several years ago, actually, before I joined my current organization, I would regularly say to people, I had the best leader that I could have ever been, and never have had another one like that. Now, as you and I were talking about earlier, I have a phenomenal executive that I have the privilege of working for now, that in many ways is very similar to my first leader. But in my journey, it's been incredible to sort of see, having been at the hospital space, the college space, the startup space, and then the global med tech space, how many people get into leadership roles who clearly just don't seem to care about people and don't seem to actually take a moment to think about what they're saying or doing and how it affects people.
And what makes it doubly challenging is they'll never say that. They'll say the words, of course they care about people. Of course they're people centric. Of course their values align with our employees are our most important resource. Our people, we're a family. I mean, the words will be said, and many people are great actors. Maybe they even believe the words, but when push comes to shove, in the heat of the moment, when hard decisions need to be made, or even no decisions, just the way people are treated day in and day out, how you show up at your meetings, who you listen to, who you nod at, who you smile at, who you engage with. I think it's in those micro leadership behaviors where employees are watching and they pretty quickly pick up on how you are viewing them and how you are viewing others. My own somewhat version of what you just described is, early on, I had a leader who was very confident, very capable, and very comfortable in his own skin. So one of the things that he often did, not often, but he was very comfortable when he made a mistake or when he just did something kind of dumb, or over the weekend when he told a dad joke and his kids just rolled their eyes, and like he was very comfortable sharing occasional lameness, like and that's a very comforting thing when you've got a leader who takes the job seriously but doesn't take himself so seriously. And when he would make a mistake, he would not only own it, but he would own like the taking it apart. He would unpack how, like, I normally wouldn't have made that mistake. What led me to that? And then would deconstruct it and share. If it was valuable, he would share that with us. Well, I thought that was really cool. So I take that forward into my own career, and then at a certain job, I found that when I shared things about myself that I thought were like humorously human, or when I had made mistakes, I found people taking advantage of that. Like, oh, Dan acknowledged his decision-making error. Well, let's dump all of that on him. Then, okay, all right. So, all right, Dan made an error. That becomes the story. Dan's fault, Dan's mistake. And you only recognize it, a little later on, and you realize, wow, so that's not working the way I expected it to work in this particular environment. And that was tough for me. I mean, I to start to realize, okay, there's so much more to this human leadership thing. People are so complicated, because those people who might take the opportunity to land the blame on me, they're doing it for human reasons. They're doing it because of their own insecurities, because of their own uncertainties. And it's taken me quite a while to, I think, really understand how complicated all of this is, that there's never any one way that will always work the same with every group, with every person, in every situation. And as a leader, you have to have this ability to be about the people and about the numbers, about the metrics and about the humans, about the heart and about the head, and not see it as either or, but find. I don't even know how to describe it. It's not either or, and it's not in the middle. It's like both and. And does that prompt any thoughts?
It does. I mean, I think, I look at, sort of my first president and CEO, and I always try to think back almost like as a barometer, because I can remember, as we were talking about earlier uh, today, you know, you can still be a very human-centered leader and still strongly lead around outcomes. I mean, it's very possible, and it's certainly an experience that I've seen, particularly, with that president and CEO, and also even in my experience today. You can do both. I think, but certainly what it does require of a leader is to certainly have a high level of emotional intelligence. You certainly have to be a leader that's committed to constant learning, both personally and professionally, because, I think inevitably you have to be the type of leader that realizes you're not always going to be the smartest person in the room.
Mhm.
I mean, I look at, the team that I have the privilege of working with and serving today as their senior leader. Most of them, majority of them, have higher level credentials than me. And, at the same time, we all can contribute in dynamic ways to moving critical work forward. And as the leader, it's my job to be able to support them and lift them up and ensure that, their voices are carried through in every single aspect of the work that we do. It's not about my voice, it's about our voice. And I look at, particularly the impact that president and CEO had on other leaders, particularly, was really, really profound, because, when you look at it, to your point, right? I mean, I always say leaders have a choice to make in the work that we do. We either have a choice to make it for people or break it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's really how, as simplistic as I say it. And the reason I say that is because, you look at our global workplace today, the number one issue is mental health and well-being. And so as a leader, when you're thinking about outcomes, or if you're thinking about people, there are ways to say to say someone, hey, this is your goal. I need you to achieve it, but I'm going to help you to get there, versus do your goal and get it done. Like, there's a big difference that just our words can make a big difference. And frankly, if you're more of a human-centered leader, actually, when it comes to goals, you realize that most of the time, the best goals are actually goals that we all share.
Mm-hmm.
So even in a performance perspective, they should always cascade. I mean, most leaders that are committed and actually understand how you really achieve results know they all should be shared in some capacity, because there's inevitably some work that I need to do for the team to achieve what aspect they need to do, and vice versa. And so if we're all aligned and we're moving in the same direction, actually, we're going to achieve more together, versus if we silo it, which I think oftentimes has been the case, where leaders think, no, they have goals and their job is to just get it done. I'm going to be sitting over here. That's not how it was ever designed. And certainly as a student of leadership from a doctoral level, it's clear, that we as leaders, I look at my own journey. I started at an entry level role. Mm-hmm. And there's a reason for that, right? You get to experience all the different levels, all the different elements that ultimately, hopefully, make you a much stronger person, but also a better leader.
Well, and I think if you are that heart leader, it impacts everything you do. And let's just talk about goal setting, for example. A heart leader will work with someone to come to a set of goals that they're confident that person can achieve. It may be a bit of a stretch. It may be a lot of hard work, but in the end, they don't set people up for failure or for potential failure. They set people up for success. And I contrast that with, I know a gentleman who very consciously works to set what he calls stretch goals, but he actually, in his mind, he calculates or thinks through, what do I think they can actually achieve? And then let me push that by 20%. And his mindset is, I know this to be true because he has verbalized this to me in his rare open moments. And he has said, that's the way you stretch people. You set goals that they can't quite reach. Then you've gotten all that you could have gotten out of them. If you set a goal and they reach it, he said, I feel like, oh man, I should have set that goal 10% higher. So to him, he's approaching goals like you approach a negotiation. Like I want to squeeze the most out, and it's just now weirdly, he's actually relatively successful, quite successful. And I think what it says to me, at least, is the practices that I know are not optimal.
Yeah.
They're dangerous because they produce results short term. They're dangerous because you can tell people to march. And if you have the power of a leader, you can say, this is my way. We are going to move forward. Bam, bam, bam. And you will drive compliance, and it will feel good. Because you'll see the army marching, and you might even produce short-term results, and that will validate your good feelings. But you and I both know, if you're looking for long-term success in that process of causing your army to march, part of your army is going to LinkedIn looking for new jobs. Part of your army is going to Glassdoor, leaving anonymous negative reviews. Like it's your most talented who are the most dangerous, because they have the most options. So when your most talented aren't feeling validated or trusted or appreciated, they will go elsewhere. And I think more quickly today than perhaps 10 or 20 years ago.
Yeah, 100%.
But I'll share with you one quote. I had a different leader say to me, I do not want my leaders listening to all the voices. I don't want them gathering everybody's opinion. I want my leaders to be the loudest voice in the room, make their hard calls, and march their armies forward. And I don't want to. Now, the two examples I just shared happen to be men of a certain age, white men of a certain age. Now, I'm not saying it's all them. It's all that generation. But there is a certain tendency of kind of old school leaders. They've gotten so used to the levers of power working in a certain way that I think they struggle with this talk of heart and humanness and emotional intelligence. Have you had experience with helping a leader maybe who's a little emotionally challenged, helping them make the transition or come to some degree of self-awareness?
Yeah, for sure. And I think in my experience, to your point, it's actually a bit easier to do that these days than it has in the past, because you do have a lot more avenues to show them, either data or sometimes even real time, what the impact of some of their decision making is. And I think, to your point, right? I mean, companies generally are spending a lot more time thinking about those aspects. I mean, you look at it today, right? Like, at least in healthcare, chief learning officers, chief human resource officers have now been very much charged with that important element of retention, right? And so that wasn't always the case. I mean, the reality is they were much more recruitment focused, much more, focused on other aspects. But retention has become, in many ways, one of the cornerstones for every, single leader too. Even functional leaders that lead departments have more elements around retention. What are you doing to retain good, effective talent? Are there aspects of your area that wouldn't allow you to retain really, really good people? I think, to your point, sometimes it takes time to help a leader understand that you have to pay attention to those things. In some of my experiences where I've seen leaders make that evolution, it's actually being able to highlight specific examples to them where they could have done a better job of either reacting or presenting in a manner that would have allowed whatever they were doing to actually be a bit more effective. I also think, in my experience, it's made a big difference when it's a leader that can actually accept, and not just accept, but embrace feedback. And I know that's not easy for everybody, right? I mean, even for me at times, there's some feedback that you hear and it may kind of rattle you. But from a people perspective, as a leader, I just had this happen even earlier today. We were talking about, right, where I had one of my direct reports, share with me that, in a meeting that I was in recently, that they thought the way that I, addressed a situation was not necessarily the way that they would have hoped that I would have addressed it. And frankly, they were right. And frankly, I'm so glad that they not only felt safe and comfortable to come to me, but that they could share that in the way that they shared it. Because as a leader, there should be nothing more important than me wanting to also do better and grow. And, frankly, make sure that my direct reports and their direct reports and so on feel that they have that space to share that.
So
but I think, again, go ahead.
When that difficult feedback was shared with you, was there like a micro moment where you instinctively said, well, you don't understand, and you wanted to self-validate, you wanted to explain, hey, let me explain it to you, because you obviously got it wrong. I think we all go through that, and leaders with emotional intelligence quickly move past that self-validation to, okay, no matter what, how I showed up for you and your team was this way. So it doesn't matter that my intent was different. It doesn't really matter that you misunderstood a word or phrase or whatever. Ultimately, the effect of how I showed up was what you just described. But that is hard. I mean, we all have the ability to tell a story that validates us, that keeps us whole.
Yeah, 100%. But I also think, like, in my scenario, to be honest with you, I acknowledged this leader immediately. And then I also said to them, it may be useful for you to also understand contextually why I said what I said. But at the same time, you are right. And that I should have actually said it to you instead of in the full group.
Yeah.
Because they were right. They were 100% right. Now, I did provide the context, and ultimately we still determined I was wrong, because it's the truth. Sometimes, as many of my team members know, I do care. I care just as much about people as I do outcomes. And so there are moments for sure where I may come across as like much more outcomes, particularly if it's like a repeatable thing. But at the same time, there are ways to manage the conversation better. And I think, to your point, you can't sit there and just self-validate.
Yeah.
Because the reality of it is that if you're a leader that cares about constant learning, you also have opportunities to learn. And, frankly, the most important thing in my experience, and look, this is not something that I always did really, really well. I've been coached in this space for sure throughout my career. But the main thing that I have always believed in this case is that a message, you can easily send a message, right? I mean, in those moments, you could either easily send a message where, I'm right, I'm always right. Or you can send a message that clearly says, you know what? You bring up a really, really good point. I also could do better the next time.
And to say, let me give you context, totally acknowledging, yep, I was wrong. I do want you to have this context, but that doesn't dilute the fact that I didn't handle that right.
Exactly.
Because what most leaders the trap they'll fall into is, well, let me share with you the context.
Yeah.
But they won't do the other half. And even if you or the person as the leader is absolutely right, even if if constructive feedback comes back to you and that is off track, it's absolutely metaphysically wrong, if you don't find some way to accept it and validate it, not be inauthentic, but you have to validate it, because otherwise what people will take away is, oh, okay, I guess I won't be bringing any more feedback, because if I bring feedback, all I really get is a talking to. All I really get is an explanation. Okay, fine. And it doesn't take much. I mean, people are noticing my micro leadership behaviors, and just even the little things can make a huge difference.
100%.
Well, let me ask you, do you watch the HBO series, The Pit?
Oh, I love it.
The Pit is amazing. And as we're talking about nurses and leadership, honestly, something just struck me, that the great thing about nurse leaders is they are both strategic and tactical. They manage those one-on-one human moments, particularly like the charge nurses in the pit. They manage those one-on-one moments beautifully, but then they back up and look at the entire floor, the entire operation, and the ability to zoom out and then zoom in.
Yep.
Getting those human moments right. And I realize it's a television show. I get that. And I realize it's scripted. But I think as I've talked to other nurses and doctors about that particular show, they have said to me, yes, it's a little, it's a little dialed up emotionally, but it's not bad. It's really true to life from many of their experiences.
100%. Yeah. I have found it to be the closest I've ever seen a medical show to the exact hospital environment. And obviously, I spent a decade in the same hospital. There's just so much there that, now I'll say, obviously the administrator that's in the show, is unfortunately more same old.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways.
And they give her like one dimension, she,
Yep.
and I imagine they're probably a little more human than that, but she is there with her clipboard.
Depends. It depends.
Really?
There's always one of them, at least, for sure. And I think when you look at just the microcosm of a healthcare environment, in many ways, like a healthcare environment, a hospital is like a little city, right? So when you think about you have everything, right? And so when you think about it from a leadership perspective, you can expect to see certainly that element. I think what's always sort of incredible, though, is what you see, particularly, to your point in the show, that I like is the teamwork aspect that comes in. And you really see, and that's one of the things that I'm always super grateful that I had the opportunity to learn, particularly in my healthcare experience, because I learned in a regional community healthcare system before it became big healthcare. Which is, where we're at today in the United States. And in those days of a regional community healthcare system, you really, you learned what it was like to make decisions that ultimately benefited those that you lived near, those that you went to church with, or went to synagogue with, or went to the grocery store and saw. It was a very, very different experience than today, where decisions are made, generally quite a bit distance farther away from the community that they serve. And so there's just so much that, to your point, it's a great show to look at from a leadership perspective, because you can unpack a ton.
Yeah. And in our world of work, a lot of the subtext, a lot of the drama under the drama goes unstated, but it's there. But in a show like that, the reason it's a great show is because it's all brought to the surface. So but the genius of an ensemble like that is in the writing. There are characters and writing that represent this broad spectrum of humans, different values, different priorities, different agendas, different capabilities, different weaknesses, and all of that whole mix, that whole chaotic bundle of humanity shows up in the pit. I think the truth is it probably shows up in your workplace every day. It's just a bit under the surface. People don't show up expressing their angst very openly. And then when they do, leaders panic. I had a leader, this goes back a couple of months, again, older white guy, but he said that he had one of his younger employees come to him to say that the young man needed to take 2 days of personal time off because his dog had passed away. And the leader, I was coaching him, and we were having some coaching conversations once every couple of weeks. So he brought this up because he said, the moment he said that, I had two voices in my head. He said, the voice of me, like growing up, is, okay, your dog died. Okay, I mean, if you really need a dog, you go get a new dog this weekend. But you don't take 2 days off because your dog died. But he said, this other voice in my head realized that's not the right answer, and he said, unfortunately, I froze. I didn't give the wrong answer, but I didn't really know what the right answer was, and I said something lame like, "Well, you do what you have to do." And he said, as I replay that in my head, I realized that's not very comforting. In fact, it's almost a bit of a threat. It's almost like, well, okay, you do what you have to do. And so we had a chance to talk that through. But I think this new world of being employees being more comfortable bringing their baggage to work to say, hey, I need this, or I have this challenge, or I may be autistic. I may have ADHD. I may have this challenge, or that, or like, we keep telling them, bring your full humanity to work.
Yeah.
And good news is they got the message, so they're bringing their humanity to work. The bad news may be a fair number of our leaders aren't ready for the whole human, and are struggling sometimes with that.
Yeah, and I mean, and to your point there, right? That's where I think anyone that has a leadership role, because it doesn't matter on title, needs to regularly look in the mirror and say, do you want to lift someone up today, or do you want to tear someone down? Because, the reality of it is that we live in a world where it's so intertwined. I mean, the stats are so clear, right? I mean, UKG did a study a few years ago, which I'm sure you saw, right, where they looked at the mental health impact that people face in the workplace and what they face at home. And it's the same exact percentage. So if you're a leader, if you're a people leader particularly, you have to look at it from the vantage point that you could be the only person in that person's life that could truly make them feel good about themselves in that entire day. And I guess I just wonder, from the vantage point of, for anybody, I mean, look, I know I'm not perfect. I still have opportunities to do better too. But like, if I can be the only person in that person's entire day to make a difference in their life, I better strive to be that person. And I better do everything possible. I can still coach them to be successful and impactful in the work that we do, and still demonstrate respect and empathy and compassion, and still be somebody who they actually want to call upon, as compared to being just another person in their life that makes them think life is just not even worth living for. I mean, that to me is how clear it comes down when you read those statistics and those facts. And I remember, a few years ago, I was doing a presentation at the HIMSS conference, which, obviously was the healthcare HIMSS conference, because I always want to reference, because people are like, oh, that's an interesting conference to speak at. But like, I gave this presentation, and actually I didn't realize, but the finance, healthcare finance news team was in there, and they actually went and they wrote about it. And it was this big story about how, I was arguing that for CFOs in the world, if leaders cared more deeply about these things, it would have the ultimate ROI to an organization. And I still believe that today. If you realize the impact that leaders' actions, words, decisions make on the bottom line of a company, I do strongly believe it's profound. I mean, sure, can you be a successful company and have bad leaders? Yeah, unfortunately, we all know that that's true. But can you be an even more successful company and have leaders who care about people, that ultimately go tell everyone else how much they care, and everyone wants to work there, and it creates a much better environment for everyone? Who doesn't want to have that? I mean, that to me is ultimately what we all should want to strive for and strive to be.
And, if as a leader, if you think through each of your direct reports, maybe you have 7, maybe you have 14. I think one of the challenges of leadership today is the layer structure has shifted, so that there was a time decades ago when you would, at the most, you might have a leader with 7 or 8 direct reports. Now it is more common to have 12, 14, 15. And so if you have more people, you inherently have less time per person. And I do talk to leaders when I ask them, so how much time, like how much one-on-one time do you actually give to each of your employees that's really about them, not about reviewing their projects, not their OKRs, not their KPIs, but that's actually just a check-in with them, how they're doing, what's important to them. And as we have that real conversation, it's not often, it's not weekly. For many of them, it's bi-weekly or maybe once a month. The most common answer is bi-weekly. And then I will ask, so then think back to maybe the last 4 bi-weekly meetings. How many of those got canceled or bumped because something more important came up? And almost quite frequently, if you're a busy leader and you look, you've got meeting, project, and then there's the 30-minute one-on-one with one of your direct reports. It's so easy to bump it. It's so easy to move it, and then it gets bumped and moved. And then to not think, what message am I sending? When 3 weeks in a row it gets bumped, or I show up 10 minutes late and I have to explain, well, I've been, it's a busy day, it's the afternoon, I'm way behind. And so I'm 10 minutes late to a 30-minute meeting. We've got 20 minutes. And at the end of my 20 minutes, I've got to go because of my next meeting. What message are you sending in your rush? And I say this as a guilty party. I started several years ago asking a question during my quarterly performance reviews with my employees. I was advised to add a question toward the end, which was, tell me how I'm doing for you as a leader. How am I showing up for you as a leader? And to ask it every single time and not expect openness right away, but you consistently check in. And the advice I was given was, it may take 1 or 2, 3 quarters, because they're going to want to think about it. Like they're going to be watching your behavior. So you have to earn the right to ask that question. Because the self-protective response is, oh, you're fine. You're good. All is good. And when finally a couple of people started sharing their feedback, like they always prefaced it with, I know how busy you are. I know you've got so much happening. And I took that and I realized my busyness had become a symptom. It was an excuse. And it wasn't good. And there was a moment of real self-reflection where I realized, okay, I'm the guy who says the words, people are my priority. I say those words, but that ain't my actions. My actions were very different. And I would say that was a profound realization for me. I would just suggest as leaders, look at your calendar and look at your time commitment. And yes, I get it. I do get how hard it is to say, I'm going to give each of my direct reports 30 minutes a week. Now, that may be 30 minutes of time in the break room, and maybe 30 minutes of formal meeting, and maybe 30 minutes to walk down the hallway. Who knows what, but couldn't they get at least 30 minutes? And if the answer is, well, no, I've got 20 direct reports. Well, then maybe we need to rethink the wisdom of having 20 direct reports, because it doesn't take much. It does.
100%. 100%.
Something that just says, I noticed that PowerPoint deck. I really noticed the clarity of that messaging. That was really, you put some serious thought into that. And I want you to know that there was no fluff. And I noticed, or that email that you sent out to customers, or that just the little stuff to say, I noticed. If you remember, well, you may not remember because you're a younger man than I, but Ken Blanchard, I think back in the 80s, he wrote the 1 Minute Manager. The essence of the 1 Minute Manager was, just spend 1 minute. Find 1 minute to recognize someone doing something right. Just 1 minute a week. Recognize them doing something right, and it'll make all the difference. And I think the 1 minute manager would be beautiful for us today if we saw a resurgence of it.
Yeah, I agree.
So let me ask you: have you, in your moments of stress, moments of overwhelm, have you had moments where you find yourself really not showing up the way you would like Geoffrey Roche to show up most of the time? Anything you can share with us where you may have learned about yourself?
Yeah, for sure. I think, there's definitely been those moments. And, I'll say like, it's actually interesting. I think because, particularly in the teams that I've had the privilege to lead, even here, I mean, to your earlier point, for most of my tenure here, I've tended to have a large number of direct reports, but just recently now, I'm fortunate to now have 3, versus quadruple before.
Mm-hmm.
And, to your point, there's, I think many of the people that are on my team now have also worked with me in other experiences. And, some of those people certainly tend to be some of the more common ones to come and say, hey, you seem stressed today. You seem a little different.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and most of the time they're right? Like, it's the reality, I think. But for me, what's been really important within that is, I'm super glad that they feel, again, willing and able to tell me that.
Yeah.
But for me, it's also been incredibly important. And it's something I often tell even my team is, like, we got to give ourselves grace, and we've got to celebrate all the small wins just as much as the big ones in the work that we do. And so, I'm lucky also to have an executive where, based on my tone, based on how I look in a meeting, she knows how I feel. And she, to her credit, obviously, and she lives over in Europe, so our hours are different, but to her credit, it doesn't matter when it is. If she, observes something that seems like she needs to check, she will call. Doesn't matter when.
Mm-hmm.
And she will just say, Geoffrey, how are you doing? And if I try to act like, she'll keep drilling in, because she wants to make sure that there's nothing that she could be doing to assist me to navigate whatever it may be. And so I think, that's really, really important. And, I've learned a lot even, from that experience and from others to do the same thing. Where recently I was, I could just tell a team member seemed super stressed, and I reached out to them afterwards, and I could tell initially they didn't want to just come out and say to me what was bothering them, because ultimately it was about someone else in the organization. But I said to them, look, I know you have a lot on your plate. I'm just calling really to see if there's anything I can do to help you with it. This isn't about, me searching to get somebody in trouble. This is really about me seeing how I can be helpful. And so I think that what I've learned is that it's incredibly important that we as leaders also, to your earlier point, acknowledge we are also humans. And so, it's likely that a team member is going to see that you're also stressed. It's likely we're going to see that they're stressed. And what we need to do in those environments is to respond as if we're one another. We need to be there for one another. We need to support and encourage one another. We need to empower one another, through that process. And so what I've learned is that it's more important for a leader just to be honest and genuine than act as if we can just manage it because we're a leader. That's where I think the team clearly has a disconnect with a leader. And I've seen that. I've reported to people who would sort of harness all the stress that they would have and try to act like they were this big, successful leader that could just handle it all. And then at some point they would burst. And sometimes that burst would actually impact so many others. And if they would have just been a bit more real and a bit more authentic, team members would have been willing to kind of walk alongside them to help them through that process, because that's what you want to do. Genuinely, people do want to be there for one another. And so it's been a great learning experience for me in that space.
So I know that I can sometimes be a bit cynical, sometimes too easily see the dark side or the downside. And maybe it's because I do have a lot of employees who will reach out to me. They may have read one of my books, or they may have read an article, or they're like, I do have people sharing their stories. And generally, if someone reaches out to you to share their story, they're not calling to say, hey, my leader just did this amazing thing and I want to share it with you. It's generally, you won't believe what just happened to me. But I do think, and I would love to get your perspective on this, either validating it or not. There's a bit of a battle happening right now in our culture broadly, that there is this trend toward more humanity, more sensitivity, more humanness, more heart, more I see you. But there's also a counter trend amongst some, which is, I need to clarify your roles and accountabilities. I need your KPIs. I need to track your metrics. That's what's most important. I may see you, but what I really see is a bundle of KPIs, and I need those things to move forward. I don't pay you to hear your problems. I'm not your parent. I'm not your mentor. I'm not your coach. I may provide some work direction, but I do think there is this counter, and I'm going to use a trigger word, woke versus anti-woke. There is this sense of, we need to get away from all that sensitivity. And I know it because I experience it. I have leaders push back at me and say, hey, that is great on a TV show, but this is the real world. And I need to march my army forward. I don't know. Do you see that same tension of, two different kind of opposing points of view?
For sure. I think I've seen it in every organization that I've had the privilege of serving in. And I think sometimes, it generally, in many ways, can kind of also very much depend on the executive of the respective area, in so many cases. But ultimately, it can be incredibly challenging, to your point, right? I mean, because if we look at the workplace as a community, and you go back to sort of the core tenets of a community, you realize that you're always going to have some sense of tension. The question I think we ultimately always have to be asking as workforce leaders or as workplace leaders, whether we're in person or virtual, is how do you harness that tension and always look to turn it into a positive? And so I think, generally my view of it is that I think, organizations have to do a much better job of preparing new leaders to understand what it's like to lead, particularly in that organization, but at the same time have to have accountability for all to understand what it's also like to continue to lead within those organizations. And there has to be a healthy sense of, yes, employee engagement, but also a healthy sense of feedback across all angles to make sure, and at the same time, obviously we talk about it all the time, right? How do you create psychological safety? Make sure that people are actually willing and able to tell you how they feel and why they feel that without fear. I mean, there's just so much that you have to unpack in there. But ultimately,
and people want to do a good job. Rarely
Exactly.
do people do a bad job on purpose. So if you have a community and everybody wants to do a good job, if in some areas a good job isn't happening, maybe that's worthy of unpacking. Why is that good job not happening in some areas? Is it a lack of clarity? Is it a lack of direction or focus? Like, what is it? It's generally not because the person wants to do a bad job, but I think some of us quickly default to that. And I think we also have to recognize we're working in this working community is being rewired by technology acceleration. Think about technology 20 years ago. 20 years ago, it felt fast and complicated. It's much faster and more complicated now. technology acceleration, cognitive overload. We have AI whiplash. What do we do? What is it going to do? What this way, that way? What AI whiplash? We have social upheaval. There was a time when your corporate culture could be separate from social culture. I don't think that's true anymore. It makes its way into the workplace. So social upheaval, cultural differences, generational differences, critical thinking skills, being degraded. All of this leads to a different work environment, which is harder to lead in. I will acknowledge it's harder to lead in, but I think it's why employees yearn for that strong heart leader that you're describing. They yearn for it, hope for it, maybe doubt that it, until they experience it, they may doubt, they may be cynical, but I absolutely believe as we look forward 5 years, 10 years, 20 years into the future, we're going to have to become more human as leaders. I just don't see how there's any other choice. You can only drive people so far.
I agree 100%. And I think to your point, right? Like, it goes without saying, but the most important skill set for a leader today is to be an active, intentional participant in listening. Yeah. And I've been guilty of this too sometimes, where you're in that conversation, you're immediately thinking about what you want to say. But it's really that important exercise to take a pause, be paying attention to what they're saying, let them finish, ask a clarifying question if you need to, but let them finish, and ask your clarifying question after they finished. Make sure they know immediately how much you appreciated what they said. I think it goes a long way. And it also goes a long way to your point. Like, I had this happen recently where something very, very important at work, where I said to some of my direct reports and their direct reports, as soon as I leave that meeting, I will get you in a room and we will talk about everything that we talked about in that room. Since I know so many of you care deeply and you weren't able to join just because of the nature of how the meeting was organized, but you're going to be the first to know. And I will tell you every single aspect that was discussed. And, when I shared this with the team, the first thing one of the leaders, the other leaders on one of my direct reports said was, I can't thank you enough for fulfilling and following through exactly what you told us you would do. And, just that, that easy thing, frankly, to demonstrate, because I know how hard they've worked on it, that they need to be the first to know, and that they need to have an opportunity to know everything that was discussed, doesn't take that much time, right? And like, again, now it's possible at times that my calendar could have got sidetracked, but I made sure to block in advance because I knew that they cared deeply and needed to know that information. And I also knew that if I didn't do that, what message does that send to them? Well, I was able to go to the meeting, but they weren't. And I also knew that it wasn't one of those moments that I could share with their leader and have their leader then share with them. They needed to hear it all at the same time from me, because I knew that it would be what they also needed to hear. And again, everyone heard it at the same time and everyone was so appreciative. Like, we just have to take that time to do that kind of stuff.
And when people know that things are being discussed or a meeting is happening, they naturally wonder, particularly, when leaders or people in power get together to discuss, you naturally wonder, and nature abhors a vacuum. So if someone doesn't tell you, your mind will fill that gap. You'll create a story about what's being said or done or decided. So I want to be respectful of our time, but you just prompted me to share one more thing. The most challenging feedback I've ever received came from my wife. And she said to me one day, and we'd been married 20 years. And she said to me one day, I see it in your eyes when you check out. I can tell when I bore you. I can tell. She said, I don't usually say anything, but I can just see there's this moment where it's like we're either discussing something and you've decided, or you're done with it and you moved on. She said, I see it. And I bet everyone at work sees it as well. And I'd love to say she delivered it more kindly than that, but she didn't. It was pretty direct. And it caused me to really think about, how am I acting when people are talking and sharing? Am I telegraphing to them when it's time to shut up? When it's time to, you talk about being a good listener. That moment, it was about 10 years ago, but that moment was really important to me, because I realized I need to develop some compensating strategies to make sure when I start to mentally check out, how do I make sure I ask the clarifying question? And maybe even another follow-up question, and maybe even a follow-up question after that, so that I'm like, so it prevents my brain from shutting off or moving on to something else when I realize I've got to stay in this with you. And if you've said something that's prompting a thought, I have to find the gracious way to share that thought, so I stay in this with you. It's made a huge amount of difference, because I didn't realize how I was clearly communicating, I'm done, time to move on. And now I feel bad, for 20 years of direct reports who had to experience that version of me. Geoffrey, this is so good. I really do appreciate your practical, real world approach to this. Any final thoughts that you'd like to leave us with?
No, I mean, I think to your point, right? I think time is not on our side, as we were talking about earlier with these topics, right? I mean, I think we have a shrinking middle management in most organizations, and we as leaders have to be committed to really inspiring that next generation. But to do that, we also have to model and show the way.
Yeah.
And that means some days we're going to be wrong, and we've got to accept and help them to understand that we want to grow and be better models. But at the same time, we do have to really address these most challenging elements, particularly of leadership, because if there's too much toxicity, within your realm of leaders, we have to remember it's not just impacting the organization, it's impacting their livelihood.
Yeah.
And so to me, I think it's we have to act with urgency, and we have to truly be committed and bring our whole self into this work, because ultimately I think it's not only what is required, but I think it's also what we're called to do, especially more today than ever.
Thank you so much. I'm sure we'll talk again. Bye-bye.
Thank you.